Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today there is some massive news in Cards. They have finally announced the rotation list. So, a quick recap in case you haven't really been following. Essentially, when the new expansion comes out later this summer, they actually gave the exact date, June 27th is when the expansion is going to come out, so about a month from now. When the expansion comes out, there's going to be around 90 new cards entering the game, but they're going to be removing around 90 cards currently in the game, and they're just going to be removing it. So you'll still be able to play it in friendlies. There's going to be a queue where you can play with these cards, but you can't play them in traditional ranked, and presumably all of the official tournaments will be not including these rotated cards. However, importantly, in the future, they will also bring back a handful of cards that had previously been rotated out. So, if your favorite card's getting rotated, don't worry, there's a chance it will come back, and if it doesn't come back, you can still always play it in other game modes. So, here is the official post of all of the cards that are being rotated. So, obviously, there is a lot of them. And obviously this infographic is very, very small and kind of hard to make out. So, I'm going to walk through all of the cards one by one. Some of them I'm not going to spend any time on because they're not cards anyone has ever played. And some I'm going to spend more time on, and at the end I'm going to give my overall thoughts on how the rotation is affecting each nation, how the rotation is going to affect the meta, and yeah, with that, let's get into the video.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alright, so starting off, I'm going to take a look at the 5 cards that have already been rotated. So they rotated 5 cards, one standard from each nation, that essentially sees almost no play, just to get people used to rotation, what it looks like, what's it going to mean. So these are the 5 cards that have been rotated already. This is not anything new, I just haven't really talked about it in a video, so I'm just going to quickly run through them. So, starting off, the British lost this artillery that I've literally never seen played ever. And yeah, not a lot else to say about this. Germany lost Suppression, which is honestly kind of sad because this card had just been reworked, and I think this card has a degree of potential. Like, especially with something like Bonsai, if there's more Bonsai-esque effects in the future, or if you have a deck with a lot of draw, you can essentially just play this, to trade out a lot of units. However, if you're a deck with a lot of draw and you're running this, probably not also having a lot of units to trade out, so it's not a card that was especially good. It's not a card that really saw any play ever, but it's a card that I thought had potential, so it's a little sad to see it go. Shibata Regiment is not a card that had any potential. This card is just terrible, and I don't think anybody is really upset to see it go. The F4, F3 Wildcat, it's just a vanilla 2/3 fighter with 2 operation cost. It's worse Buffalo, it's worse, there's a Japanese 2-cost 2/3 that reduces the operation cost. This card is just hilariously, laughably bad. And they could have changed it, they could have given it an effect. Instead they're just rotating it, and honestly, I think that's fine. And then last but not least, the Soviets have already lost At All Costs. I think this one is the one that surprised me and a lot of other people the most, because this is a card that has a lot of potential, and it's a card that has seen some amount of play. Not in any, like, Tier 1 decks, but I know Red Sun in particular has a Soviet Japan attrition deck that runs multiple copies of this card, and he's brought that to tournaments and performed quite well with them at tournaments. But 1939 decided that they were going to be rotating At All Costs, which is just weird because there's so many other cards that you could rotate. Like there's No Surrender, No Retreat, No Retreat I think. The 0-cost destroy a friendly unit, gain health equal to its health. I mean, there's also countless other examples of just terrible Soviet standards you could have rotated. Instead they rotated At All Costs. But we will see that this is going to be a bit of a theme. They're removing a lot of the cheap AoE from the game. So, with those 5 aside, let's get into the first card that is going to be rotated in the future. The rotation is coming out June 23rd, I believe. The exact date is in the post. You can see on Steam. And if you are ever confused about what cards are being rotated, in the game, there's going to be a tiny icon next to these cards letting you know they will be rotated in the future. And I think after May 30th, you won't be able to open these cards in packs. And by June 23rd, I believe, you will no longer be able to play these cards in Standard. So, the first card that we are going to look at is HMS Illustrious. We're going to start from the elites to the standards, from going through nation by nation. So, starting with the British elites, there's going to be 3 elites rotated from each nation. The first one for Britain is HMS Illustrious. This is going to be a huge hit to air. I mean, this card is just incredibly strong. It is incredibly powerful. It's even versatile. This card is seen play in control decks, both control decks running Empire Strikes, or just on its own in pairing with Rule Britannia, or just using it as an early board clear that can pair well with Synthetic Rubber later in the game if you're trying to get a bit of chip damage in. We see a lot of Commonwealth decks run Lancaster, Wellington, sometimes HMS Illustrious, to have those Blitz Bombers that can deal the extra damage to the HQ if the opponent heals out of Commonwealth range. So, seeing this card, honestly, I don't think it's too surprising to see this being rotated, but this is going to be a very big hit to air. And then, let's take a look at the second card. So, Royal Research is being rotated, and this is all of the researches are being rotated, all 3. So, we'll see that when we get to the other nations. But Royal Research is arguably the research that has seen the least amount of play in recent months. I don't think it's the worst. I think it's probably slightly better than Germany, just because I think it's slightly more versatile. The German one is very much a German control card. You're playing it for the discard, destroy unit, discard 2 cards like 90% of the time, and that's just not an effect that realistically you're going to want in a aggro deck. We've seen some aggro mid-range decks run it exclusively for Flying Bomb. But, yeah. Royal Research has seen a lot of play in air, and it's seen a lot of play in just Britain control in general. And honestly, I am incredibly happy to see the research cards gone. When research came out, I was incredibly against them. I complained about them nonstop. I asked on numerous occasions for them to be nerfed. They eventually were nerfed. And even after nerf, I mean, they certainly weren't nearly as broken as they were on release, but they're just so powerful as standalone cards that you are just forced to run it. Like, you would never consider building a German control deck without German research, or a British control deck without British research, or a ramp deck without US research. Like, you just would never consider that. They're just so powerful. And also, being rotated is going to be Spy Ring, and that is a card I am very happy to see. Honestly, I'm more happy that Spy Ring is gone than just the researchers on their own, because, again, using an order which is incredibly difficult to interact with as just your quasi-win condition is incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly uninteractive, and I'm just honestly happy to see it go. Then we get to the third and final elite that is being rotated, and it is Shelling, which is huge. I think Shelling has been run in literally every single British deck since this card came out, and if they weren't running Shelling, it was probably a mistake. The one exception is I don't run Shelling in my Britain-German Commandos deck, just because I'm running 4 copies of Timely Supplies, and it works kind of awkwardly with Shelling, and you're not really... By turn 5, you want to have a board with Commandos pinging, and you don't really want to spend your entire turn playing a Shelling. So, there is very small exceptions to the always run Shelling. Of the Shelling Monty couple, those cards are often associated together, since they do very similar effects of pinning all of the enemy units. Monty is certainly the better of the two, and it's the more versatile of the two, and I think a lot of people, myself included, were expecting Monty to be rotated. Monty is not being rotated. However, Shelling going is going to be another big hit to Britain, another decent hit to Air. And, I mean, Britain Control isn't too popular right now. Really, Britain Air is the only British deck that's seen a lot of play in the meta outside of Discard. And this isn't going to be the biggest hit to Discard ever. This is just a credit denial card going, so I'm happy about that. Nobody likes playing against credit denial. And the sort of pin Britain Control deck that's been around the fringes, that deck is definitely going to be missing shelling. But that is the end of the British Elites. Now let's get on to the British Specials. First card up, Hudson. This card's terrible, and didn't see play before, and is being rotated, so moving on. Next one is MI5. This is a huge one. This is going to be a massive hit to Discard, because the actual discard effects in Discard are not nearly as big as the draw denial effects in Discard. Because if you draw a pretty crappy card in your hand, or maybe you draw a good card in your hand, but you want to save it. So, for example, you draw Sherman. It's your only card in hand, you top deck a Sherman, and you don't have a US unit in the front line, and you say, I want to risk my opponent discarding the Sherman for me being able to top deck a Blitz US unit to draw with the Sherman. That's a pretty decent risk. That is a risk that I think it's pretty valid to take. However, you absolutely do not want to risk your opponent playing MI5, because then not only are you not playing the Sherman, you're not drawing with the Sherman, you are also not drawing on the following turn. MI5, just an incredibly powerful card on its own, and I'm happy that this is going, and I hope it doesn't come back, because this card is just incredibly frustrating to play against. Then, Seaforth Highlanders is also going, so this is another hit to Brit-German Discard. I think this hit is going to be very, very interesting, because before Seaforth Highlanders came out, it wasn't like Britain Control didn't exist, and it's not like Britain Control didn't have guard options, and it's not like the aggro ran rampant. And then Seaforth Highlanders came out, and it was just objectively the best guard in the game, and every single British Control deck ran 2 copies of it since it came out in Breakthrough. And now it's going to be gone, so we're going to see, is it going to bring back the East Surrey Regiment, the 2/6 guard from Theatres of War that was the sort of main guard unit in Britain Control decks before Seaforth Highlanders? Or maybe people are going to forego early game guards, they're going to rely on Black Watches, maybe Gren Guards makes a comeback, and then instead they're going to use more early game orders or even early game units. Maybe Honey is going like 3 stacks of Honey. Maybe that's going to come back into Control. I think this is going to be a very interesting card to be rotated, because it's not just simply a incredibly powerful card is removed from the deck. It is the best of a group of cards is being removed. So now the question is, what is the next best? Do you take the next best? Or do you try to replace it with a similar effect? Is this just going to be too much for Britain Control? Is Britain Control just quote-unquote dead now? These are all the questions that we're going to have to answer. But I think it's also important to note at this point in time, since we are doing this nation by nation, don't start freaking out. Don't just be like, oh my goodness, 1939 has killed Britain. Look at all of these cards Britain is losing. It's completely over for the nation. The nation's completely dead. Because every single nation is losing cards. Every single nation is going to be losing cards that they feel like, oh my goodness, like, this deck can't exist without this card. Well, every deck is going to have cards like that, so every deck is not every deck is equally losing cards equally, because I think it's very, very clear to see that some decks, like Brit Air, are losing a lot more than others. And with that, let's take a look at the next British special that's being rotated, which is The Empire Strikes. And people have said Brit Air is dead, Brit Air is over. On numerous occasions, some people said it after the close air support change, which was, a buff. Some people said it after the nerf to Fiat. Some people said it after the nerf to Finest Hour. And Brit Air just keeps on chugging. It just keeps on being one of the best decks in the game. I think with the loss of HMS Illustrious, Shelling, and the Empire Strikes, I think it is actually fair to say Britain Air is dead as a tier 1 deck for the time being. Now, obviously, it could easily come back. They could easily give Brit Air like some absolutely busted cards in this expansion or an upcoming expansion. They could bring back HMS and Empire Strikes in the future because, again, rotated cards don't mean they're gone forever. However, I think just now as a tier 1 deck, I think with the loss of HMS Illustrious and Empire Strikes and Shelling, I just don't think the deck is going to be remotely capable of handling the pressure that can be put out by ground-based mid-range decks. And if the win rate... now, obviously, you can just, like, play a bunch of bombers and kill your opponent without ever needing Empire Strikes. I'm not saying that, like, suddenly AO has a losing matchup into every single mid-range deck ever. But if AO's strength was having, like, a 80% win rate against those decks, as well as a positive win rate against almost every control deck. But if your win rate against the other mid-range decks is suddenly dropping to 50, maybe even sub 50, as well as your win rate against control decks is also taking a hit, that's just not a tier 1 deck anymore. And I'm very happy about this, if you can't tell. Brit AO not being a tier 1 deck is amazing. The Empire Strikes not being in the game anymore is amazing. And I am incredibly happy about it. I'm incredibly excited to see the future of cards. And yeah, I think this rotation's doing a really good job so far. Now, let's look through the limiteds and standards for Britain 17-pounder. This isn't going to have an impact. 22nd Guides Brigade. I mean, this card is, like, honestly not bad. I think this card is one of the better cards that has seen zero play. So, it's been rotated. Not a lot else to say about it. Then we get to Second Chance. This is a card that has also seen no play because you can run 4 copies of Convoy and 3 copies of Lend-Lease, so why would you run even a single copy, let alone 3 copies of a card which is just strictly worse Convoy and strictly worse Lend-Lease? I'm not sure, and I guess 1939 also couldn't think of a reason for you to run this card, so they are rotating it. And this is going to be my first big... and then Tactical Withdrawal is going. I think this card has seen literally zero play, so yeah, whatever. And I'm just going to go back to Second Chance for a second here. This is, I think, a missed opportunity. I would have loved to see Lend-Lease be rotated. And you might be thinking, like, why do you want to see Lend-Lease rotated? Has Brit Air not been hit enough? Has Brit Control not been hit enough? Why do you want to rotate Lend-Lease? I want to rotate Lend-Lease because I feel like Lend-Lease has sort of broken draw in this game. Because previously, when you're trying to think about what cards you want to run for draw, like before Lend-Lease existed as a card, you thought, okay, well, maybe if I want a lot of draw, I'm going to run 4 Convoys and 2 MI5s. That was something that happened very frequently in basically every British control deck or British air deck. But that takes a lot of deck slots. And then some decks decided to go with, like, Japan Ally to run the Empire of the Sun, which is the destroy a unit, draw cards equal to its attack, to run a handful of big draw cards that were a bit more expensive, a bit more situational, but it gave you more deck slots. And that was always an interesting dynamic. Now, just Lend-Lease, you can run 3 copies of it on top of any amount of convoys you want. It just feels like it takes a lot of thought out of adding draw to a control deck. And we haven't seen a ton of British Ally, but, like, again, Soviets draw is sort of like their big problem with Soviets. A lot of Soviet Britain decks have existed where they just slam, like, 2 or 3 Lend-Leases in that deck because... why not? It's just a good draw card. So I think it would have been amazing to see Second Chance not be rotated and rotate Lend-Lease instead, because then maybe people run Second Chance. Because maybe you start to think, do I run 4 Convoys and some Second Chance? Or maybe I want to find my draw cards from Second Chance, so I run like 2 Convoys, 2 Second Chance, so the Second Chances draw the other Second Chance, it draws the Convoys on top of, I mean, Monty, and like you're just going to be running some other orders. But I think that would have created a really interesting dynamic. Instead, Lend-Lease is staying in the game, and Second Chance is going, which means we're not really going to get that opportunity to see if this card could have seen play. Then Tactical Withdrawal, we don't need to talk about that. Tempest Mark V, I mean, I think the biggest impact this is going to have is on red banner targets. When you do Partisans red banner against British cards, you no longer can get the Tempest. I mean, yeah, maybe this has an impact on draft. I don't even think it's that great of a card in draft. So, this card going, not a lot else to say. National Fire Service is going. I'm incredibly happy about this. National Fire Service is a really, really dumb card. Yeah, this card was just incredibly stupid, and it enabled a ton of really, really stupid combo decks. And I just don't think it's particularly interactive. Like, there's some games that can have cards like this in them. I don't think Cards is one of those. It's just incredibly uninteractive, especially with the main, like, combo piece you play this with being Commonwealth. But, like, even just with Commonwealth, I don't even have that much of a problem. But, like, this card's also run in things like Siberian OTK, in Japan, Britain, like, the burn decks with the Kawanishi Isolation Last Rites OTK. And you just run this because it's, why would you run, like, 3 credits heal 7 when you can instead run 2 credits, like, heal 20, because you're just going to be pinning your opponent's board all the time, and anytime you can't pin the board, you play this card so your opponent can, like, hit you for 5 or 6 max, instead of, like, dying to Blitzkrieg. I'm just happy this card is gone. Then we have the Royal Scots. This card has seen 0 play. It was a funny card. I think, honestly, this is, like, one of the most unique card designs in Cards. But it was never good, so it's gone. Then the Spitfire Mark V is gone. I'm honestly kind of happy with this, because I don't ever want to see Spitfires be a meta deck, and them just having slightly less Spitfires, I'm happy with. And also, it's just a vanilla 6-cost 6/6 fighter, and fighter's arguably the best body in the game. Like, obviously it is worse than artillery just in terms of what the effect is, but I mean, almost every single artillery sucks as a unit. So fighters are typically the best units in the game. So just a 6-cost 6/6 fighter is incredibly powerful if Spitfire ever becomes meta. And you already have the 5-cost 5/5, the 4-cost 3/5, that's usually a 5/5, the 4-cost 4/4, that's sometimes a 6/6. The 6-cost 5/6, the 7-cost 5/5. You have a lot of Spitfires. Losing one of them, sure. I'm happy with this. And last but not least, we have Merchant Navy. This card is terrible. So, now we move on to the German cards, starting with the Elites. And as previously mentioned, German research is being rotated. So, this is going to be a bit of a hit for German control. I don't think it's going to be too big of a hit, since all the other researches are being rotated, Spyring's being rotated, and honestly, at the end of the day, in any control mirror, Reich research is most typically used to try to discard your opponent's research, because their research is better than yours. Like, German, especially Germany, Italy, never really had an issue with dealing with threats, so using the tier 3 destroy a unit, discard 2 cards was almost always used for the discard 2 cards aspect of it. And I'm happy with discard 2 cards being removed, because honestly there's a little bit too much discard in this game, and I am happy to play in a meta with slightly less discard. Speaking of discard, we have Kriegsmarine, which, it's being rotated. Kriegsmarine is an interesting card, because once upon a time when it came out in Cards, and there was a lot less healing in Cards, Mare Nostrum did not exist. I'm not even sure if Honey existed at that point. Kriegsmarine was just a very powerful card and a very popular card, but then healing came around, and decks got more aggressive, hand sizes got smaller, Kriegsmarine got a lot worse, and it has really not seen any comeback other than the German-France burn deck, and I'm fine with that deck being hit by a little bit of a nerf, because honestly, Kriegsmarine was like the big finisher. So often they'd just like have a pretty decent opener, and then you'd just be at like 12 health, because they do, like, I don't know, you'd be like 11 health. They play like 3 propagandas, and you drop to 11 health. And then they play Reichsbank, and it's just like, well, I'm dead if they have Kriegsmarine to hit me for 8, and then like an Air Blitz. And then they have Kriegsmarine hit you for 8 and an Air Blitz, and it sucked. So this card is gone, and I'm pretty happy about that. And last but not least, for the German elites, is Panzerzug. And, I mean, Panzerzug rotating, they changed the effect to be slightly more interesting, never really saw play. It was a meme card. I'm fine with it being gone. Now, I just want to quickly take this moment to look at the 3 elites rotated from Britain and the 3 elites rotated from Germany, because Britain has lost Schelling, Royal Research, and HMS Illustrious. These are all 3 Tier 1 cards played in multiple Tier 1 decks and have been played in almost every British deck since the cards all came out. Now we look at what Germany has lost. They have lost Reich Research, which is a tier 1 card in German Control, which hasn't really been a tier 1 deck recently. And then it's lost 2 cards, which have essentially never seen any competitive play in the last 2.5 years. So, it's, so far it's pretty clear that some nations are being hit harder than others. Now, Germany is the least played nation competitively right now. However, I'm a little bit worried by this because I don't think Germany is the least played nation competitively because it's bad or it doesn't have the cards or anything like that. I think it's just a very specific meta that exists right now which is holding Germany back, and that is okay. So with the meta changing, with new cards being introduced, some cards being rotated, I don't want to see just all of the nations that are currently popular and strong in the meta to just be absolutely destroyed, losing a ton of important elites, and then Germany be not barely touched because, oh, they're not good right now, and then suddenly Germany's the best nation in the game. Because you might not remember, but 6 months ago, German Control was the only control deck, and the control deck that everyone played on ladder, everyone played in tournaments, and it was really, really popular. And it has lost Reich Research. And that is it from the elites. So, let's look at the specials. They are losing Gebirgs Pioneer, which would be a hit to Alpine if anybody still played Alpine. They are losing Befehlswagen, which is actually a very interesting hit. This does affect Heinz. Heinz runs Befehlswagen, but honestly, Befehlswagen sees the most play in Jagro, so this is a bigger hit to Jagro than anything else. It's also a bit of a buff to some decks like US Frontline, because some players were baited into running Befehlswagen in Frontline, which is just objectively wrong, so they can no longer make that mistake in the deck building phase of the game. So that's a buff to them. However, I'm happy to see this card gone. It's going to be a pretty big shock, I think, to a lot of players, because I think this card is played in a lot of very popular decks, and a lot of decks that a lot of players build first. One of, like, their first main decks that they build. But this card is just really, really stupid. I mean, with the nature of the game, this card has become less and less powerful as the game has moved on. I mean, when it came out, if you pulled double Befehlswagen, you won like 95% of the time. But with just the amount of board clears that exist in the game, the amount of powerful units you can play out that are going to punish your opponent if they spend like their turn 2 attacking with double Befehlswagen, has just led to double Befehlswagen being pulled not as important. Even single Befehlswagen being pulled not as important. And that's all this card is for. If you're not pulling it early in the game, this card does absolutely nothing. So honestly, I think that this is Befehlswagen. I'm not saying Befehlswagen is a bait, because Befehlswagen in Jagro is just really powerful, because sometimes you do pull out a Befehlswagen or 2 on turn 1 going first and not punish your opponent, but destroy your opponent because they don't have an answer. Like, it's a good card, but it was limiting design space to a certain extent, and it was a very, very high-rolly card, so I am glad it is gone. But again, not affecting Germany nearly as much as German ally decks. Then they are losing Airstrike. This card has not seen any competitive play in a very, very long time. This card still sees a decent amount of play on ladder, because people just really, really like this card. No, I mean, not a lot else to say about it. They're losing more discard, but like, they're losing, like, Research, but then they're losing Kriegsmarine and Airstrike, which are, like, sort of not the only 2 discard cards that nobody plays, but, like, 2 of the discard cards nobody plays. Like, I don't know, if this Airstrike was a Wolf Pack, that would be really, really big. But it's not, it's an Airstrike. Just one final thought on Airstrike. This does make me very, very sad, because there's a bug that exists in the game with Airstrike, and it has existed for, like, 3 years, like, literally as long as I've been playing this game, where if the unit you play to trigger Airstrike has a 50% chance of being discarded, and then the other 50% chance is discarding a card from your hand. Now, that is not how the card should work. That's not how the card reads. It says return the unit to your hand and then discard a card from the hand. So there should be a 1 in however many cards you have in your hand chance to discard it. So if you have 9 cards in hand and you play a M4 Sherman, it should be a 1 in 9 that Sherman is discarded. Instead, it's a 50-50 that Sherman is discarded, or the other 50% chances is it discards any other card. Now, this has not ever been officially confirmed, but I have, like, hundreds and hundreds of points of data to suggest this, that it is 50% on the card that is played, and everybody I've talked to about this agrees that it's about 50% chance on the card you play. And 1939 just never fixed this, and now the card's being rotated. And honestly, I'm kind of glad. At this point, it's like a bit of Cards lore that Airstrike just doesn't work properly, and they've never bothered to change it, and now it's gone. So, I mean, yeah, that's all I have to say about Airstrike. Then the big one for German control. They are losing Root Out the enemy. This is a huge deal. So, this is a huge deal for a couple of reasons. One, it certainly hits German Italy the hardest, I think, because previously to Italy being the best ally for Germany, you would play Germany-Britain for carpet bombings, and Root Out was honestly somewhat of an afterthought. A lot of people didn't even run Root Out at various points of time in German control. However, both the buff to Root Out and the introduction of the massive amounts of health gain with Italy ally meant that you now had to rely on Root Out as your only AoE, and it was enough for that. So now losing Root Out means that you won't have an AoE in Ger Italy, which is a pretty big deal. However, as we will see in the future, I mean, we're losing Befehlswagen, but we're also losing a couple other cards that are used to flood the board early in the game, where that makes cards like Root Out powerful. And you could replace this with cards like the 2-cost Volksgrenadier, the 2-3 that becomes a 2-5 guard. If your opponent has a Blitz unit, that's going to stop a lot of early aggression. I mean, with Air gone, Root Out was pretty powerful against Air, because even though it didn't kill a lot of the units, it would often drop their attack low enough that they inconsequential or literally couldn't attack. So Root Out gone is a huge deal, but honestly, I think the biggest thing is less the nerf to German control, because honestly, that's not even played a lot right now. One is a nerf to Britain-Germany, or a further nerf to Britain-Germany, which I am happy about. By this point, this is like the third or fourth nerf to Britain-German discard, and I'm very, very happy about that. But this is kind of a buff to mid-range and Jagro, because those are the decks that are easily the most affected by Root Out. Like, so often on Jagro, you play as many units as you can by turn 4, and then you just cross your fingers, because you can't not play more units, but at the same time, if your opponent has Root Out, you're just so massively set back. It's a similar situation with Frontline, although I think you have a bit more room to play around it. So, Root Out gone is a very big deal. Then we have the Limited and Standards. Breakthrough's gone. I mean, this saw some amount of play as a tech card, not really competitive play. The MEBF 110 saw 0 play. Pack 40 saw 0 play. Stug F, or sorry, not the Stug F, the Stug 4. This card, I have a very distinct memory of losing to non-GMO Salt in a tournament where he played this card on turn 3 and then Bolster on turn 4 to make it into a 5/6 operation cost and hit me in the face for 10, and then I had no answer for it and died on turn 5. This is basically my only memory with this card. I also picked this card a lot in draft. Yeah, not a big deal that this is being rotated. And then U16. Again, they are rotating a whole lot of discard that is not played. Because U16 was played, and then they nerfed it, and then it has seen essentially no play since the nerf. So none of the important played discard cards have been rotated. Wolfpack, Case Yellow, Annihilation, they're all still there. MI5 was hit, though. Kind of surprised we didn't see a hit to Fog of War, something like that. I'm really honestly surprised that Wolfpack survived, because they said they were going to change Wolfpack like 2 years ago, and then they never ended up changing it. So I just assumed that it would be rotated, because they couldn't think of a good way to change it, so they just rotated it. But it's also survived rotation, so Wolfpack is just the card that keeps on going for some reason. Panzer 2C, not that impactful of a card. Rapid Engagement, again, a card that's seen no play. Rush Production, this card saw a lot of play, and then they nerfed Baby Combo into the dirt, and it has since seen 0 play, and honestly, I'm fine with this being rotated, because what is the point of this card if not Baby Combo? And Baby Combo's gone. So is Rush Production now. And finally, the Stug 3G. This card received a buff somewhat recently. However, apparently not enough of a buff to have people bother playing it, and now it is being rotated. And I don't think anyone's really going to miss it. So that is the end of the German cards. And now we get to probably the biggest single card being rotated, it is Feigned Retreat. And oh boy, I am expecting a lot of people to be very mad about this. I am honestly one of those people. I'm pretty mad about this myself. Feigned Retreat is going, and there's a couple things to say about this. So, to argue on behalf of rotating Feigned Retreat just existing in the game is going to hold back any aggressive Japanese deck quite a lot in terms of the ability to go in different strategies, try out new things, because Feigned Retreat is just so powerful, you have to build a Feigned Retreat deck. Like, you just can't play a non-Feigned Retreat Jagro deck right now, because Feigned Retreat will just be objectively better. Now, with that being said, that does mean that removing Feigned Retreat doesn't make other Jagro decks better, however. Removing Feigned Retreat just means that the best Jagro deck is gone. And, like, unlike deck like Air, where it's losing Empire Strikes, it's losing HMS, however, I mean, they still have Swordfish, they still have Gladiator, they still have Albacore, they still have Close Air support. They still have the, like, some of the best cards in the deck are gone, but the deck is still 100% there and playable. Feigned Retreat Jagro, the entire deck is built around this individual card, and it is just gone from the game. The entire deck is just dead. I think Feigned Retreat is really the only deck that is just straight up gone after this rotation. And that's a little upsetting, because Jagro is going to need new tools, because currently, in the game right now, if just the rotation patch goes out, I do not think Jagro is playable as, like, even a tier 2 deck, even a tier 3 deck, honestly. Like, Jagro is so bad without Feigned Retreat. So, I think it's a little too early to judge until we see all of the cards from the new expansion, because maybe Japan is getting some new draw conditions. Maybe Japan is getting some new cards that allow them to more consistently take the front line for things like expansion, or gain a benefit from dumping your hand for cards like Edge of the Empire. There is other draw in Japan which is decently powerful, but just not competitive. So there is a lot of potential to give them competitive cards. There's a lot of potential to give them cards that make those cards competitive. But the question is, will they? So that is, yeah, I could honestly talk about Feigned Retreat for hours, but we will move on to the next card that's being rotated, which is Home Defense. I mean, this card hasn't seen a lot of play. It's been here or there in tournaments recently, and on ladder, but it's not really had a big showing. It is really funny that they changed Ancient Empire, and we're seemingly pushing this, like, low health Japan deck, and then they immediately rotate the elite that fits into that deck, like the only elite that has that synergy. So it seems like the low health Japan deck is short-lived, or maybe it's going to get a lot of cards in, like, 6 months from now, a year from now, and they bring back Home Defense. That's always possible. They could just be rotating Home Defense until they actually decide to make that archetype a real thing. However, that probably means we're not going to be getting any more low health cards in this expansion, if we see Home Defense rotate. And then, the third Japanese elite to be rotated is Desperate Measures. So, you've seen myself and a lot of other players recently, the way they build Feigned Retreat Jagro is 2-order Jagro, where you cut Bombing Raid, you cut Enigmas, you cut Audacities. The only 2 orders in the entire deck are Feigned Retreat and Desperate Measures. And those cards are both gone. They literally just removed both orders from 2-order Jagro. And this one I'm honestly more happy about, because Desperate Measures was just such a powerful card that could swing so many games just immediately. And it really sucked to have a card that is so cheap and can be played so early that is a one-of in a deck. And what I mean by that is there's so many times you're playing against Jagro where basically you have the play that is weak to Desperate Measures on, like, turn 3. Or you have the play which is just weak to everything other than Desperate Measures. So obviously you go for the play that is weak to the single card in their deck, and then if they have it, you just lose the game. So this card is gone, and I'm going to miss it, but not nearly as much as Feigned. But again, you're taking away the best 2 cards in Jagro what is Japan gonna have? Because Japan Control doesn't really have a lot. The only thing Japan Air had going for it was cards like Empire Strikes, and Empire Strikes is now gone. So, what does Japan have? Because right now, we're seeing a lot of nerfs to things, and by nerfs I mean like to decks because the cards are being rotated, but Japan just seems to be losing everything, so I think Japan is the most in need of really good cards from this expansion. Talking about Japanese board clears being rotated, they were removing Code of Bushido. This was sort of the saving grace for Japan Air, was if they rotate Empire Strikes, Japan Air will always have Code of Bushido. Well, they rotated Code of Bushido as well. So Japan Air has lost Empire Strikes, Code of Bushido, and Desperate Measures. And we will see coming up, they also lost another board clear. So, yeah, Japan is kind of losing its identity. It's losing all of the core cards that make Japanese main decks work. And that kind of sucks, honestly. But Code of Bushido didn't see the most play. I think it is a card that probably would have seen a lot of play post-rotation if it was also not rotated. However, with the removal of a lot of these early game AoEs, I mean, Rootout's gone, At All Costs is gone, Code of Bushido, Desperate Measures, Empire Strikes. With so many of these early game AoEs being removed, it's going to be very interesting to see how the meta evolves around that. Because it means there's going to be a lot more unit-to-unit combat, and it means that decks that sort of flood could potentially come back. Like, this is sort of all a shadow buff to tokens, since tokens is just really, really weak to all of these cards previously mentioned, and all of those cards are now gone, so maybe tokens. But how well does tokens compete with other cards, other decks like Frontline and Jagro? Is there going to still be enough air to hold back tokens? I'm very, very interested in the meta moving forward. I just don't know how present Japan is going to be in it. Then we have Takasaki Regiment being rotated. This is a very powerful card in Japan Control. However, Japan Control is not really a deck, and the random discard on Takasaki is really, really frustrating when your opponent is running literally no discard cards. It's like a Japan-Poland, and then Takasaki you just run because it's a good card with a decent effect, and then it discards like 1 in 8, your best card in hand, and it makes you want to uninstall the game. So, Takasaki, I will not miss him too much. I have a lot of fond memories with this card. This is a very historied card, but not a card that's seen a lot of recent play, and a card that I'm perfectly fine being rotated. Mikawa Regiment, never saw play. This card is hilariously bad. Take Initiative. Now, this is a card that has seen a lot of play, essentially exclusively in Japan, France, and it's going, and it's interesting to see, honestly, that Japan, France is disappearing, it seems, or, I mean, Japan-France hasn't really been the same since the nerf to long-range recon, so just removing Take Initiative from the game I think is pretty fine. I don't have a whole lot to say about this. Removing a lot of the add cards to hand thing, I'm pretty happy with, because overdrawing is not a fun experience, especially when you're overdrawing due to your opponent adding cards to your hand that you have no counterplay to. So yeah, this card will not be missed by me, particularly. Then we have 144th Infantry Regiment. I'm honestly very shocked that this was rotated, because it was very recently buffed, and I think it's decent, and I think it's interesting, and now it's just gone. There's so many limiteds you could have rotated, other than this one. So this one is just really bizarre to me. Like, I'm not too broken up about it. I wasn't, like, building a deck around this card. It's just very weird to me that they would choose to rotate this. Then the B59 Kate, not weird to me that they're rotating this. This card has seen 0 play and is not particularly good. For Prosperity, yeah, I think this card's time in the game was very, very limited as soon as they did the Scouting Party change, because there was a possibility of them building a, like, mono Japan style deck around old Scouting Party. The nerf from the Emperor suggested that they might be moving towards that. Obviously, For Prosperity is still around, and then they changed Scouting Party and then added absolutely no mono Japan cards, and now they're rotating For Prosperity. So I think that's just a direction they decided that they didn't want to go in. I mean, with the game being built around having so many options for ally nations and so many different cards you can run from those ally nations, I think they probably thought having a mono nation archetype is probably just not very interesting, which I would kind of have to agree, so that's why we're seeing 4 Prosperity gone. Then Outmaneuver. I mean, this card allowed you to do some very specific combos. It's a pretty weird card. I'm not going to miss it. I'm sure there's probably some people out there who loved Outmaneuver decks who are very sad about this, but I'm not one of those people. The Type 92 Field Gun, laughably bad, never saw play. Burning Sun. This card actually saw a lot of play a very, very long time ago, to the point where it had to be nerfed, and it has seen 0 play since then, and I am happy with them removing just attack buff cards, because I feel like these cards are never going to be run exclusively in, except for exclusively in, like, really weird OTK setups, like some sort of Yamamoto, Flood the Board, Burning Sun, Dawn Operations, Attack Face kind of thing, and, like, the less stupid OTKs that I lose to on ladder, the more I'm going to enjoy playing the game. Then Gecko, I mean, even after the buff, it used to be 6 cost, it just couldn't, it was just objectively worse than Siren, and Siren is a card that you barely even want to run in the first place, so no love for the Gecko, it's been rotated. Huge one! Naval Operation is gone. So, huge nerf to Britain-Japan pin, Japan-Britain pin, Japan-France resistance, any sort of, like, Japan low unit stall deck. Huge nerf to all of that. I mean, this card has even seen some play in air. This card sees a lot of play in Japan air. And honestly, I'm just very happy this card is gone. This is not nearly as frustrating of a card as, say, Scorched Earth or Monty or Shelling. But this is a very frustrating card, and especially as a standard. And it's gone. So this is going to open up the meta to a whole lot of things that I'm pretty excited about. And last but not least, Wakamatsu Regiment. This one I feel like, a part of it is just no one has ever played this card ever. And a part of it is, it seems, based on the cards revealed so far, that Japan might be getting a sort of destruction-themed deck, and they thought, well, maybe we should just limit the number of 1-cost destruction units that exist. And, I mean, I kind of doubt this card would have seen play, but, like, if they want to rotate it, I'm not going to really complain, because not a lot else to say about this card. And then we get on to the US cards, starting with US Research, of course. And this is one where I feel like it is probably the best research, both in terms of getting off of Spy Ring. It is probably the most played research. It's the most versatile research in the game at the moment. And I'm pretty happy to see this gone. You just get a lot more interesting choices. A lot less games are decided by, oh, my opponent has nukes, so I can no longer play units on the board. So yeah, not a lot else to say. I've said a lot about the research cards already. Happy that this one is going. The Marauder, I mean, this is a card that saw basically no play, but if it ever did see play, it was to the detriment of your opponent, because, like, if you ever played this card, it was to the detriment of your opponent, because, dear lord, this card, either you play it and it does absolutely nothing and dies immediately and you feel bad, or you play it and your opponent has the least fun they have ever had in cards. It's like a Scorched Earth that just keeps going every single turn. So, just removing this, I'm happy with. I can live with that. Good change. And then they're losing High Altitude Bombing, which is sort of like a staple in Ramp. It's just like a 2 DFAs stapled into one card. I mean, it's not an interesting card. It's not a particularly flashy card. It's a pretty high RNG card, depending on the situation where you play it. And it was a card you kind of had to run in any Ramp deck, so, like, Ramp losing this, I'm pretty okay with it. Forcing Ramp back towards running cards like Adventure and B17, where they cost a little bit more, they don't have quite the immediate effect. You can be punished by things that stop deployment effects, your opponent flooding the board, your opponent having an immediate answer, things like Partisans, your Olfactories. Just adding more counterplay unit-to-unit combat into the game. Pretty happy with that. Then we get on to the specials. They are losing Mobilization, which again makes me wonder why they didn't rotate Lend-Lease. Because, like, Britain is almost always going to be the chosen Ramp ally deck, and Ramp needs card draw, so now you're just gonna 100% pick Britain Ramp, or Britain Ally for a Ramp, and run Lend-Leases instead of Mobilizations. I mean, yeah, honestly, this seems like a really weird choice to rotate if you're not also rotating Lend-Lease. Like, if they just rotated all of the, like, expensive, straight-up draw cards to force people to run more of the situational draw cards, like Buy the Sword, 5-Year Plan where you have to take the damage, Gathering Storm where you have to run specific cards to draw into them, or Empire of the Sun. Like, there's a lot of interesting draw cards in the game that are just not run because things like 7-cost draw 4 cards is just better than 8-cost draw 4 specific cards that you have to build your deck around. So yeah, they're rotating Mobilization. I mean, it's not running midrange, and midrange is kind of the only US deck that is in tier 1 in the meta right now. This is going to make US control decks a lot worse, though, because you kind of need to pair with Britain now. And Embargo, I mean, fitting the theme of cards that stop your opponent from attacking or increasing op cost being rotated. This one didn't really see play, but I'm not going to complain with it being gone. Patriotic Zeal being rotated. Again, not really going to complain. This card was like exclusively played in really weird OTK decks. And last but not least, Torpedo Attack. This card, as far as I'm aware, exclusively saw play in Unitless, and I'm sure they are happy about nerfing Unitless as much as possible, because I don't think 1939 wants to see a World Championship where someone is playing Unitless on the final stage. So, the US specials, other than Mobilization, not a whole lot to say. I mean, if we go back and take a look, it's all 4 of them are orders. So that is really pushing units, it seems, is like sort of the main theme of this. They're rotating a lot of the most powerful orders, like especially Research and Spy Ring. Then we get to the limiteds and standards, which I sort of grouped together because, honestly, almost all of them are like completely inconsequential trash cards, like 120mm gun, because no one has ever played this card. No one has ever played 47th Infantry. I mean, all of the memes about his butt, and sometimes you pulled this off of like a Seaborn Invasion and went ham, but it's gone, and I don't think anyone's going to miss it. The Banshee, again, even when like US bombers started to see a thing, like some people tried to experiment with US main bombers, Banshee was not one of those cards you ran. I mean, it's just like worse Dauntless. And then we get to the big one, Patrol. Now this is a card that has spent a lot of time not being played, and in like the last like 3 or 4 months, myself and a bunch of other players have started running this in Frontline and realizing this card is way better than we've all been giving it credit for. Not only is this card, I mean, the reason, the incentive to start running this card was to deal with Aichi. However, very quickly realized, wait, this also lets you deal with Signal Regiment, it lets you deal with the Engineers Battalion, it lets you just savage Soviets, honestly, get through First Rifles, 272nd, T-60s, even if you're just removing Guard from Train, the Armored Train, just Patrol is a really cool card, and it's a really interesting card, it's a really flexible card, and then 1939 went and removed it from the game, which, honestly, I'm really sad about this one. Just because I thought this was a really interesting card. That was just starting to see experimentation. It was just starting to see how good is this card, what decks can you play this in. And then they went ahead and removed it, which is kind of anticlimactic in the not so storied history of Patrol in this game. So, kind of sad about that one. And then Ramp is losing War Bonds. To be completely honest, I'm surprised they didn't rotate Hour of Need. Specifically just because I feel like War Bonds is one of those cards which is very iconic for cards. Like, I feel like this art is used in a lot of promotional material. Like the World Championship, the 2 times they've held the World Championship in person, they give the winner a, like, poster of War Bonds. Like, I don't have it here, but, I have, like, a massive, like, cardboard, like, poster of War Bonds. And I just thought this was one of those iconic cards in cards that would never be rotated. And especially because it's not a particularly offensive card. Like, it's not particularly good. It's largely been outclassed by Hour of Need in almost every Ramp deck. So that's why I just thought they would have rotated Hour of Need. But apparently they're just rotating War Bonds because they thought it was played less. Maybe it will come back. And then the other big one from US is the loss of 32nd Infantry Regiment. Now, your initial reaction might be, oh my goodness, they're losing 32nd, but what about Frontline? But then you should consider, what has Frontline lost so far? If we just go back in the US cards, I mean, Frontline hasn't run research in like 6 months. Frontline doesn't run mobilization. Frontline only just started running patrols, and some people still don't even run patrol. And then if we think back to the German cards, because German is the ally, they lose Befehlswagen, but they don't run Befehlswagen. They're losing, like, Panzer C, they don't run Panzer C. They're not losing a single German card, and they're exclusively losing patrol and, what is it? Is it literally, I've already forgotten the card. Yeah, no, it's literally just patrol. So, up until this point, 32nd is, other than patrol, which is very, very easily replaceable, 32nd is the first card being removed from Frontline. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, but maybe Frontline is just like a specific meta call. However, what is Frontline weak to? It is weak to pin decks. Shelling is gone, naval operation is gone. It's weak to early AoEs. Well, Empire Strikes is gone, Root Out is gone, Code of Bushido is gone, At All Costs is gone. And then it's weak to, I mean, Soviets because of Scorched Earth. Well, we're going to see in a couple minutes, but Scorched Earth is also gone. So, Frontline is really not losing a lot. Now, 32nd is a very important card, and it's going to be not easy to replace, because you have to remember that this card does thin your deck. The thinning of your deck is very important, because you don't want a whole lot of card draw. This just makes fighting Shermans much more likely. It makes having units to draw with Sherman, like having units to get to the front line to draw with Sherman, much more likely. So it's not going to be easy to replace 32nd. However, Frontline is in a position to be the best deck in the game right now. Now let's look at what else has been rotated. Land of the Free. Honestly, I'm a little sad about this one, because I tried testing out this card in different decks. And it didn't really work, but I mean, it was cool. It was a nice card to have in the game to test around, but I mean, one-cost card that lets you do something for free is probably a card that could be problematic in the future. Supply Front, this is just an absolutely terrible card that's never seen any play. And Uncle Sam, which, again, basically just saw play in, like, meme combo decks, so I'm not too broken up about this. I'm sure there's some based Uncle Sam enjoyers out there who are kind of sad to see it go. But that is the end of the US cards. So Frontline is literally just losing Patrol in 32nd, compared to Air, which is losing Shelling, HMS Illustrious, the Empire Strikes, the Code of Bushido, which isn't even run, but it's a card that could have been run to replace the Empire Strikes research. Yeah, and Feigned is just gone. And, like, Heinz is losing, Befehlswagen, which isn't a lot, but it's a decent amount. Frontline. That seems like it's going to be the deck to look out for. I would kind of be surprised, especially because if we are moving towards this early game of unit-based combat, I would be very surprised if we do not see a nerf to 5th Rangers and Red Devils, either before the expansion comes out or immediately after the expansion comes out, because holy crap, Frontline is just going to be able to dominate the early game, especially if you replace 30 seconds with like 2 more Greyhounds, or go up to 4 Greyhounds, just because it's a 1-3 body, which is so good, because most early game is 2-1 bodies. And then it also is a blitz tag, so you could take the Frontline immediately, draw with Sherman, kill something, move up. So much potential for Frontline right now, after this rotation. And, yeah. Now, let's get on to Soviets. The first Soviet elite that's being rotated is Parade. Now, this is a card which has seen play in almost every Soviet control deck. However, it is easily the most cuttable card in the deck. And, I mean, that's just because if you have a sufficient source of draw, Parade is a little greedy, since it's draw 1, duplicate it. So it's really, really good at value generation, especially if you hit one of your larger elite units. However, it's not particularly good in dealing with aggro, because unless you play it like on turn 3 and you hit first rifles, but 1, that's very specific, and 2, that already means you pass it on turn 3, which you don't really want to be doing. If you like hit Parade into a 272nd, that's not going to help you against aggro. You would rather have a convoy, which might draw you into a 272nd, but then into a Bloody Sickle or a Scorched Earth or whatever it is. The fact that Parade only draws you one card is not that great in very specific situations. So losing Parade, I don't think is going to be too big of a deal for Soviet control. I think limiting, if they're removing research, I think it's probably a good idea to remove cards like Parade that give you this extra value generation. There's no need to leave Soviets with this massive value generation after removing a lot of these tools from other nations. Then they are losing First Rifles, which I am incredibly happy about, because holy crap, First Rifles is easily like the best card in the game for it. It's like playing it on curve. Like any card in the game, if you could play it on curve, 100% of the time. Well, okay, if you could play any card 100% of the time on curve, it would be Pioneer Regiment, and then you would just play discard. If you hit Pioneer Regiment 100% of the time, you would play that. But if there's any other card in the game that you could hit 100% of the time on curve, you're gonna want it to be First Rifles, because this coming down on curve is just so soul-crushing for any deck like Jaggro or Frontline, Heinz. I mean, even in like a Mirror, you're just gonna get so much presence on board, especially if you get like a Rima down next to it. This card is just so incredibly powerful, and it had no reason to be buffed to be this strong, and I'm happy that it's gone, to be completely honest. I'm not going to miss this card. I kind of hope they never bring it back. Holy crap, First Rifles was stupidly strong. And it's gonna be pretty missed in Control, I think, because T60s are not big bodies, and we're also seeing C4ths go in, so you can't just like rely on Brit and Ally as a crutch. So we are seeing like a decent amount of like these early game large powerful guards being removed, as well as these early game board clears. So Control seems like it's actually getting like, if you look at it as a macro, in a macro sense, not like looking at a specific nation by nation, but just as a macro, it does seem like Control is being hit a lot harder by this rotation than aggro is. So in that lens, removing Fan Retreat, I think, becomes slightly more understandable, because otherwise Fan Retreat would just dominate the game. However, it does raise a lot of questions as to why Frontline hasn't been hit harder. And then their third elite they're losing is 6th Airborne. I mean, yeah, 6th Airborne is gone. I don't think anyone really cares. Not a lot else to say about this. It is just a huge unit that was too expensive to operate and move around to use effectively, and you never picked it off of Heroes of the Soviet Union. Then we get on to the specials, where we have the B4 Howitzer. I mean, this was used at Worlds, actually. This was played in the bronze match of the World Championship 2021 as an OTK card. Because you would play this, you'd give it Blitz, and then you'd buff the attack a whole lot. And I'm kind of happy that this is no longer in the game, just so decks like that can't exist anymore. I'm not going to miss it. It saw no play otherwise. Not a great card. Then Mother Russia is gone. I mean, this is just kind of a weird card that never really saw play. I mean, it saw play a very long time ago in tokens sometimes, and then especially in baby combo. This was a big baby combo enabler back when Soviet Ally was the main choice for baby combo. But, I mean, this card's just never really found a place. It's really hard to utilize. It's just a clunky card. So it's been rotated instead of reworked, and honestly, I don't mind. Not every card needed to be reworked. If it's difficult to rework, just rotate it and release a new card. Then we have Ura, which is a huge one. For a couple different reasons. One, I mean, the main one is self-damage. I think this was sort of the main win con of self-damage. People experimented with counter-offensive. Some people actually did run counter-offensive, myself included. And some people ran both. But honestly, at the end of the day, I think people realized that Ura is just better than counter-offensive. It is the win con of self-damage. And self-damage is otherwise not being hit too much, from what I remember. So losing Ura is a very big deal, and honestly, it did just create really annoying board states where you couldn't move up to the front line, because if you did, your opponent would immediately kill you with Ura. And your opponent couldn't move to the front line, because if they did, you would immediately trade down all their Soviet units. So it just led to really, really stupid board positions. And It also led to a handful of really stupid OTKs, like Siberian Transfer OTK. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with this card no longer being in the game. Then there's Workers Unite, again hitting some draw cards from other nations, which again makes me ask, why did you not rotate Lend-Lease, please? I mean, Workers Unite going... This was not the most picked Soviet draw card. It was certainly run by some players in some situations, myself included, but they still have Buy the Sword. They still have just... I mean, you don't even need... you have ally nations for draw. You also have just relying on, like, single cycle cards, like Sickle, to draw. It is going to be interesting with Parade also kind of gone and Mobilization gone, which was like the main ally right now for card draw. I mean, they're still called the colonies. In France, maybe Soviet Britain will come back. Soviet Britain does seem like it would be a pretty decent deck considering just how many anti-aggro tools are being lost. But Workers Unite is going. Then we have the 35th Mountain Rifles. I mean, after the nerf to the Casino Jagro, where sometimes you would get this out on turn 1. And it was really stupid. And then I suggested the nerf to 34th Infantry. They changed it. Everybody was happy, and this card proceeded to see 0 play. So it is going to continue to see 0 play because it's being rotated. 845th Rifles. This one is a card that saw a lot of play. However, not recently, because it's sort of been outclassed by Bryansk Regiment, also with Air being the #1 deck in the game. This card just isn't that effective. And you'd rather run, like, triple Bryansk, double Trika, something like that. This is a card that definitely could have seen more play, especially with the state of the meta being the way that it is, and unit-based combat being more important. So the fact that they are rotating this card is kind of weird to me, honestly, because they just really seem to be coming down hard on Control. I don't know why. Because it's not like Control was incredibly strong. And they're coming down hard on some of the important cards. Such as Scorched Earth. Like, Scorched Earth is a stupid card and should not have ever been in the game. And I'm so glad. This card, I am the single happiest... out of all of the cards being rotated, this one makes me the happiest. Scorched Earth is such a dumb card. And it was so terrible for the game. And it is now gone. And I am happy. So incredibly happy. However, 845th, this one just seems like you're coming down a little too hard on Control. I mean, maybe they just really don't want Soviet Control to be meta again, even if it's a meta with new cards, or different cards, or old cards. But yeah, we're moving 845th, we're moving Scorched Earth, we're moving Spy Ring. This is going to be another big one, and another one that I'm incredibly happy about, because I do not like Spy Ring. I never liked playing Spy Ring-based decks, where Spy Ring is the win con. I always thought that was really stupid, really high RNG. It was also run in a lot of, like, sort of solitaire decks where you ran, like, triple Scorched Earth, ton of guards, ton of healing. This was run in the Siberian Transfer OTK, because sometimes you got, like, synthetic rubbers. And, yeah, Spy Ring is gone, and I am happy we have removed the value generation, the RNG for, like, triple frickin' nukes. It's all gone. And then we also lose SU, which... yeah. Then we get on to the standards. The 3rd Guards Regiment, not a big deal. Conscripts, not a big deal. No Retreat, not a big deal. And SU-85, not a big deal. They're losing absolutely nothing on the standards. However, on the limiteds, they're losing a lot. On the elites, they're losing a little. And on the specials, they're losing a decent amount. So Soviets all around, I think, pretty... not, maybe a bit more than average. I say they might be hit the hardest after Britain. I think out of the main nations, since we're now done with the main nation cards, I think the hardest hit is probably Britain, followed by Soviets, and then Japan. I mean, it's hard to place Japan, because they're not losing the most cards, but they're just losing every single card that gave Japan a playable deck. So... it's weird. Like, I don't think Japan is being hit the hardest, but I think Japan is going to be the worst post-rotation. But there was more than just the 5 major nations. There was, of course, France and Italy. Poland is not losing any cards because it's only cards that have been released past... it's all cards that have been released less than a year and a half ago, or like the last 2 or 3 expansions, essentially, are safe from rotation, which means legions and up is safe from rotation, meaning every single Polish card is safe from rotation. So there is 5 rotated French cards, 5 rotated Italy cards, starting with the 155C Model. Never saw any play. Liberation. Now this saw a ton of play, and it is gone, and I'm pretty happy about it. I didn't hate this card, but I mean, I'm also not really gonna miss it. I wasn't a huge fan of this in Soviet France as of late. I know a lot of people are, and I mean, Japan-France Resistance has fallen off the map, but this was certainly a core card in it. So again, Japan-France Resistance, if all the nails weren't already in that coffin, this is another one. Japan-France Resistance is dead and buried. And yeah, I mean, Britain-France Resistance was kind of a thing, but mostly this is affecting Soviet France right now for the players who did run Liberation as just essentially a 6-cost heal 9 discarded card from the opponent. And yeah, that's a pretty stupid effect. So they've removed a lot of the really stupid orders from the game that just made the game a lot less interactable, or control mirrors a lot less about units, which does raise the question as to why they didn't hit Annihilation or Wolfpack. I'm not sure. But then we have Sabotage going. I mean, Sabotage hasn't really seen any play since the massive nerfs to Resistance, like 3 years ago. And I think they're just kind of removing it because I mean, Western Allies, this is a really stupid card that I'm glad is gone, because people would just play Western Ally decks where you try to do like turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 Hour, if you need turn 4 Western Allies to pull a Persian and play Land of the Free on it, to have a Persian in the front line on turn 4. And yeah, you can't do that anymore. So I'm happy about that. But then they're removing Vive la Resistance. So they're removing Vive la Resistance and Liberation. These were like the 2 big Resistance cards. Now obviously they're still arming the Resistance. There's still the Expeditionary, Legionary guy who adds the 2/2 that adds a Resistance to hand. But I mean, just removing Sabotage now, kind of getting ahead of it. They might, I could see them bringing a Resistance back in a pretty changed way, and then bringing Liberation and Vive la Resistance back with it. Maybe. I could also just see them like also rotating the rest of the Resistance cards in the next rotation 6 months from now, and then just forgetting Resistance ever existed. And I could see them doing either way. Honestly, I'm kind of fine either way. Resistance is not a archetype that I need to be good. Then we get on to Italy. This is actually slightly out of order. The Obice is being rotated, and I think I would expect them to bring Alpine back. I don't think Alpine is an archetype that they want to get rid of entirely, but they have rotated a lot of Alpine cards. The Gebirgspioneer in Germany, the Mikawa Regiment and Mountain Rifles in Japan and Soviet respectively, and they're rotating Obice. They're rotating Sforia Marchetti. No one has ever played this card, so I'm not going to talk about it. They're rotating second Alpini. So with them like so wholly removing Alpine from the game, now obviously there is like still the Gebirgspioneer. There's still like the 1/2 Alpine guy. I think there's the 4/3 Alpine guy in Germany. Alpine still exists, but I would expect them to bring Alpine back with a bunch of new Alpine cards in the future, like 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half from now, maybe even. I would expect them to bring Alpine back, because it's an archetype that could use more cards, and would need more cards to be relevant. And then, okay, then my screen is going to freeze for a bit, and we get Mare Nostrum changed. And by changed, I mean removed, sorry. Mare Nostrum being removed is very, very big in terms of just limiting the total amount of healing in the game. Now, Mare Nostrum has not been the most relevant card in the last, like, 3 or 4 months, because people have moved away to Soviet France. Germany has been less popular, with the Britain-German discard, even German-Britain discard. Just Italy ally control has not been incredibly popular as of late. However, it very, very easily could have made a comeback, based on what is being rotated. So, just getting ahead of that, removing Mare Nostrum, I think is pretty fine, because you still have 7th Alpini Regiment. You still have the 2-cost Fiat plane that heals. I think having Italy have the single largest healing card in the game, it was fun while it lasted. I know a lot of people probably didn't have fun while it lasted, but it's gone now. I could see this coming back later. I could see this never coming back. Either way, I'm kind of fine with it. Italy Control was cool while it lasted, and it might still exist in the future because they still have Line for a Day, Decima, 7th Alpini, of course, but it will exist in a very different manner. And I think German Italy, in its current form, at the very least, is probably dead. At the very least, I don't think you're going to run Panther Gs anymore without Mare Nostrums. And last but not least, they're rotating the Fiat CR42. I mean, since the nerf to this card, it's seen essentially no play, and just removing it from the game I think is pretty fine. And that brings us to the end of the end of all of the cards. Once again, here's all of them in this infographic. We got through all of them. I mean, I'm going to have a video, potentially talking with some other players about what decks are hit the hardest, what maybe the new meta is going to look like. Now, obviously, we need to take a look at what cards are coming out, and you can definitely expect me to have videos in the near future talking about the revealed cards. Maybe even I get to do my own reveals. We will see. But in terms of just the reserve pool, I mean, we've been waiting for this since the minute they announced it, and I think they did an all-around good job. I think they very easily could have done absolutely nothing, and just taken a very conservative approach and remove literally nothing, just remove the worst cards from every single nation and have zero impact on the meta. And I think they also could have just taken a blowtorch and burnt the entire thing down and just removed the strongest card from every single deck in every single category. And they did nothing. They did neither of those. They sort of took the middle path of removing a decent number of strong cards from every nation. Now, I don't think they did a perfect job. I mean, you've heard me go on about Lend-Lease a couple times now. I think Lend-Lease would have been a big one. I think Wolfpack probably would have been a big one to remove. I feel like German Control, especially with every nation losing card draw except for Britain, I feel like Wolfpack is going to be made more powerful as a result of that. Japan, I mean, it's hard to evaluate Japan not knowing what is upcoming. I mean, it's hard to evaluate everything not knowing what's upcoming, but Japan especially, because removing Feigned Retreat, you're killing Japan's only deck. Japan-France Resistance is gone. Any pin deck is kind of gone in Japan. Japan Air is largely gone without new cards. But yeah, Brit Air, seemingly tier 2 at best. Jagro, gone. And then small nerfs to Soviet Control, German Italy Control probably gone. Britain discard, huge nerfs to it. Resistance, largely gone. I mean, Soviet France didn't lose a lot, except it is important to note, like, they didn't lose a lot of French cards, because you could still run triple Call to the Colony, triple Rima, yada yada yada, but they're losing Scorched Earths that some players ran, you losing Spy Rings that some players ran, so it's losing its best cards against both control and aggro, so it's all around just becoming a more fair deck, and it's going to be interesting to see if it's just how fair it is, because fair decks tend not to be played a lot. And then, of course, we need to see, is Frontline just going to be top dog in the new meta, because, holy crap, it's certainly looking like it, because Frontline has lost next to nothing, and all of the other decks in the game have been nerfed relatively into the ground. Maybe there's just going to be some huge anti-Frontline cards in the next expansion, we'll see. But with that, that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on the reserve cards, cards you were most surprised by, the cards you're most excited to see rotated, the cards that maybe you're incredibly sad that they're rotating, your favorite cards that are being rotated. Let me know all of that in the comments down below, or you can join my Discord and continue the discussion over there. But that is it from me. That is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.